Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night at the local time. We have lots of very interesting details, so let's start. First let's talk about Ukraine itself. The previous night the Russians conducted massive missile strike all over the entire territory of Ukraine. The Russians were using cruise missiles, the Russians were using ballistic missiles, significant number of drones. The Russians were attacking the Ukraine from the south, from the west, from the east, from the northeast, from many directions. There were lots of explosions. The Russians were trying to discover the Ukrainian air defense positions. The Russians were trying to destroy the Ukrainian energy facilities. And later we got the map of explosions. As you can see, the main explosions took place in Kiev, in Kreminna, where we can find the Kreminna oil refinery, in Dnipro and the Zaporozhye, with significant number of energy facilities. And the main explosions were taking place in the western part of Ukraine, where we also can find at least 2 or 3 power plants, and of course we can find the gas storage. We have lots of details, we have lots of explosions, and we start receiving the first photos just with a very bad quality, because the photos we got from the Ukrainian side, and it's not allowed to show the area of explosions, but not to reveal its own position of the person who was making video. But anyway, we have lots of evidence confirming that the Russians attacks was very successful. And during the video we got another report. During the making the video we got report that the Russians launched Kinzhal, and most likely now the Russians are trying to destroy another Ukraine air defense system like Patriot or IRST, and most likely when you're gonna watch the video you will already receive the details about the Russian Kinzhal strike. Now let's move to the line of combat contact. We have lots of very interesting details as well. The Ukrainians continue clearing the Krinky, let's say, foothold, with the purpose to start offensive another landing operation once again. Significant number of aviation strikes, artillery strikes on the Russian positions, so we expect the activizations of the Ukrainians in the very near future, at the same time when the Russians are going to activate their Kharkiv offensive operation, which we will discuss in a few minutes, because we got additional updates about possible Russian plan. Now we're moving further. We have some updates from Robotyne. The Russians managed to improve their positions, and the Ukrainians have already, let's say, abandoned Robotyne. Now the main Ukrainian forces and the main Ukrainian defense are located, let's say, on the eastern and the northeastern part, let's say, of Robotyne, not even of Robotyne, but inside of the village. And the Russians continue hunting the Ukrainians now in between the villages, between the let's say, fields, which is very important, because there is some gap, some gray zone between Ukrainian positions and Russian positions, and this gap is located in the northern and the northeastern part of Robotyne. There are no more Ukrainians inside of the village. The Ukrainians abandoned, but it requires some time before the Russians are able to clear the area completely. Moving to Urozhaine area, we have additional details that confirms that yet the Russians haven't managed to establish complete control over the farms on the southern part. We have, if you remember, yesterday we discussed the clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians for the farms. The Russians first gained their positions, then Ukrainian counterattack, and the Russians were forced to fall back. And now we see that the Russian FPV drone was hunting and attacking the Ukrainians in this part. So most likely, as I understand, according to, if summarize everything during the previous few days, this territory is already under Russian control, and most likely these farms and these territories still under Ukraine control. We will wait for additional updates, but if nothing changes, we will adjust the map as we just discussed. From the other side, we see continued Russian hunting on Ukrainian forces in the central part of Urozhaine. The Ukrainians continue sending additional reinforcements to the south, but most of those attempts were unsuccessful. Ugledar, Причистовка, Novomikhailivka, Konstantinovka, no updates during the day. Now we are moving to Krasnohorivka. The Russian sources reported that after the Russians established complete control over the industrial zone, the last few days the Russians mainly were concentrated on the stabilization of the situation and clearing operations, because this industrial zone is very big. There are lots of facilities, including underground facilities. So the Russians basically couldn't continue moving further, neither to the north nor to the east, and they were trying to stabilize and clear the area. And today we got the first confirmation the Russians managed to complete this situation, this task, and now they're going to move further, because now there is no risk of being counterattacked by the Ukrainians and so on. And according to information information we have, the Russians are going to move exactly on this direction. The Russians are not going even to pay attention to the eastern bloc because there is no need in this. If they're able to move at least on this line, till this line, the Ukrainians in the eastern part will be encircled and basically destroyed. So that's why we expect that either Ukrainian counterattacks or the process of abandoning their Ukrainian positions. Now we're moving further to Nitailova. The clashes in the area continues. During the previous night, the Russians published additional few videos of destroyed Ukrainian light and armored vehicles as a result of FPV drone strikes, as a result of artillery strikes and Krasnohorivka strikes. So the Russians continue clearing operation. The Russians continue hunting the Ukrainian artilleries in the vicinity of Karlovka. As a result of artillery duels, few more artillery systems of the armed forces of Ukraine were destroyed. Now we are moving to the fields, to the west north of Avdiivka, to the southwest of Ocheretina, and as we discussed in the previous updates, for now the Russians are moving exactly on this direction. We were expecting, at least I was expecting, that the Russians would try to attack Alexandropol, New York, and Toretsk and Stara Mykolaievka, so this direction, but the updates and reports are coming from the western part of Ocheretina. Let's start from the south. The sources reported that Ukrainians haven't prepared any defense belt, let's say, on the way to Novopokrovska. So this is the main problem the Ukrainians are claiming on this direction, and the Russians are moving, and basically the Ukrainians have nothing to show the Russians and nothing that can slow them down. Few more tanks and Bradleys were destroyed on the direction. On this video we can see another destroyed Bradley. Moving to the north, the sources reported that the Russians continue advancing to Sokol, and now the Russians are trying to attack the main defense belt of the village by the name of Sokol from the north, let's say northern direction, this way. We have reports that the Russians are moving. The Russians are trying to establish control over the stronghold. If the Russians are able to do this, the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back from the village. And if the Russians are able to capture this stronghold, this might be a very nice foothold for further offensive to Progress, Vovcha, and many Yevgenievka and Voskod, to all these towns and settlements. So this is the current situation. Very interesting details are coming from Alexandrovka. Once again, another report from another Ukrainian source that currently and during the previous, let's say 11 years since 2014, the Ukrainians haven't managed to invest even a single dollar, even a single penny to create any fortifications to the northwest of Avdiivka. And the Ukrainians are saying that this is the main reason of collapse of Ukrainian defense belt. So this is not a very big problem, as I understand, from Ukrainian side to move for the Russians this direction. Furthermore, we got a report that the forces of 147th Artillery Brigade abandoned their positions in Ocheretina, mainly due to complete absence of supply support and because the Ukrainians start using artillery force servicemen as, let's say, stormtroopers or something like this. So that's why the Ukrainians start abandoning their positions in Novoalexandrovka, and we might expect additional progress of the Russians. And if the Russians are taking Novoalexandrovka, this is I can't even imagine what is going to be next. It's very difficult even to predict what's going to be after. We got more details about the Russian, let's say, Russian tricky things. On this photo, for example, we can see something like a warehouse or something like production in the fields of a fake weapon. On this video, we can see how the Russians are building, let's say, fake multiple launch rocket systems, the 20, the 30 howitzers, and the source reported that this photo was made by the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainian author reported stated that the quality of this weapon is not so good, and from this angle it's very easy to recognize all these things and that it's a fake weapon. But the author says that if this weapon, let's say, if the Russians establish this weapon, let's say, somewhere in the forest and add additional, let's say, camouflage, then it's very difficult to, let's say, to understand whether it's fake or real weapon. So the Russians, as you can see, continue creating different tricky things, forcing the Ukrainians to make mistakes. Furthermore, we got more and more updates now. It's like a main trend, let's say, I don't know, situation in the Russian army. Now everybody in Russian army start creating turtle tanks, and most likely turtle tanks shown its, let's say, superiority on the field, domination on the field, with big armor, with complete absence of any possibilities from the Ukrainian side to destroy them. So I believe that this is going to be something new in Russian army, and more tanks will be completely covered with additional armor. Now we're moving to Chasiv Yar direction. During the previous night, we haven't received almost anything, just one video of how the Russians damaged and destroyed the tower in this area with communication equipment. So this is the only thing we got. No changes, no ground operation has begun yet. So this is the situation on Chasiv Yar. Now we're moving to Seversky Donetsk River, to the most important area, and we got lots of updates from this territory. And the most important of them is that there is a very big fire, very big fire, and all this territory, every single square meter in this area is covered with a very powerful fire because the weather is very hot. There is a lot of, let's say, weapon explosions, artillery strikes, flamethrower system strikes. We have, for example, this is the photo of Liman, the town in the vicinity of the railway station, and the forest is burning so much, so heavy, so the entire town was covered with the fog. This is the map of fire anomalies. As you can see, around 30% of the forest from Liman till the Russian Kreminna is covered with fire, and of course this will lead to collapse. Obviously, this is another satellite image. The entire area is covered with the fog, and it's impossible to fight in any way. If the, let's say, fire intensified, this will lead to this will force somebody, either the Russians or the Ukrainians, to start falling back, because it's impossible even to stay in the fire forest. And we have the final video of the fire in the vicinity of Liman. We saw the first picture. This is the car, probably Ukrainian car, who was heading to Liman itself, and we see the results of fire. We see the effects of fire. We see how big fire is, and this is going to be complete collapse of somebody. Maybe the situation that either the Russians and the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back from Kreminna forest, but as I understand, somebody will start using this as a benefit, but not as a negative thing. Central Kupiansk direction, we have additional few updates from the, let's say, line of combat contact, few more destroyed vehicles, and so on. The Russians, as we discussed in the previous updates, currently in offensive state with the purpose to get Oskol River. Borderlands, we continue receiving different updates. The Russians continue pummeling and hunting the concentrations of Ukrainian forces along also the forest. As you can see, this is another forest. The weather is hot. Forest on the way between Borderlands and Kharkiv itself. Ukrainians use this natural barrier to hide their equipment, and most likely this area also will be set on fire very soon. Another destroyed Ukrainian position, the multiple launch rocket system Vampire, was discovered in the town by the name of Ruski Tishkin as a result of counter-artillery duels. That artillery system was destroyed. The Ukrainian intelligence provided us additional information about the concentration of forces of the armed forces of Russian Federation along the border, and according to Ukrainians, there are around 50,000 soldiers, around 35,000 people, soldiers of personnel. The Russians concentrate along Belgorod border. So if we go back on map, so according to the Ukrainians, on this area there are around 35,000 soldiers. And also the Ukrainians are saying that on Kursk direction in this area, the Russians concentrated around 15,000 soldiers. So the Ukrainians, the main statements and the main conclusions the Ukrainian sources made, that the Russians currently don't have enough of forces, enough of power to start full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to establish control over Sumy or over Kharkiv. Basically, with this amount of forces, it's impossible. But the Ukrainians are saying that maybe the Russians are planning not to establish control, but just to start clashes. So just to start clashes and to force the Ukrainians to redeploy additional, let's say, forces on this direction as well. It's the first thing. And another thing, that Ministry of Defense, as we discussed in the previous update about the fighting groups, so the Russians are just trying to create the fighting groups, and the main purpose of these fighting groups not to capture territories, but to reduce Ukrainian soldiers, reduce the number of Ukrainian soldiers. So this is the main purpose, to increase the losses. Currently, the level of losses of the armed forces of Ukraine varies somewhere in the vicinity of 1,000 personnel per day. Now the Russian main goal is to increase this number to 1,300, 1,500. In this situation, nothing will help the Ukrainians. It doesn't matter what kind of mobilization you, let's say, conduct. It will never help you with such a heavy losses per day. So this is for now the Russian main goal. When talking about political events, the sources reported that currently the Russians are getting so much money from oil, so as they never used to get in the previous period and the previous, even, let's say, in peaceful time. Furthermore, the sources reported that currently the Russians producing so many weapons, so many, let's say, rounds, artillery, shells, munition. The Russians are producing more than 32 members of NATO altogether. So imagine yourself, one Russia produce more than entire NATO with its countries, with population, with its possibilities. Today, a report that Austria is not going to join NATO. So this is the situation, and that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.